the purpose is, oh, sorry, my computer is telling me that it's recording. Okay. So the purpose of our coalition is to make action. So we concentrate on how our struggle is developing in the streets mainly, and against this attack on right to housing and this attack on our cities and the gentrification procedures. So this is our purpose, and I just will say another word about how we engage against MIPIM, because Stella will explain what is MIPIM, but I just want to say that in 2014, we have already done an action in London against the British edition of the MIPIM, and this action took place because Boris Johnson, who was then the mayor of London, was going to pronounce a speech, and the purpose of the Radical Housing Network, who did a call to action, was to block Boris Johnson's speech at this MIPIM gathering in London, and the European Action Coalition was there and supported it. This information I read in the study of Antoine Guironnet, who will present it tonight. So we are very happy to organize this meeting because actions against MIPIM is one of the things the coalition wants to do and needs to do in order to defend the rights to housing. So thank you, Stella, for giving me this time to present the coalition, and I will stop now.
So do you hear me? I hope you hear me. So hello everybody, it's Stella from DAL Droit, Logement, the French group, French organization that is also part of the European coalition. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining this webinar tonight, and in particular to thank Antoine Guironnet, who kindly accepted our invitation to present his research work on the MIPIM, which we consider to be a very important contribution in the studies that analyze the way capital and financial markets play a key role in the transformation of the cities and in the housing crisis all over the world. So just 2 words about the MIPIM. So the MIPIM is one of the world's largest real estate fair, where public actors and politicians meet with all kind of professionals of the real estate market. So from architects to urban developers to private investors, banks, pension funds. So they meet them in order to convince them to invest in their cities and in the territories that they represent as public actors. So in other words, the MIPIM is the place where those who represent public interest negotiate the privatization of our common lands and goods and cities. So for us as activists for the right to housing and to the city, MIPIM represents a symbol of what we denounce, so the commodification of housing and the city and the profit that capital and the markets make by exploiting this essential need and right also, that is the right to housing and like the right to have to access to an affordable housing. And also, as Eva mentioned it, the MIPIM, the action, the mobilization against the MIPIM is in the core of the creation of the coalition. Is the first action actually that the coalition organized back to 2014. So that's why it was important, and it is important for us as coalition to organize this year different actions all over Europe in order to denounce this huge meeting between public actors and the biggest private investors that produce the housing crisis that we live today in all the cities all over the world, and that dispossess the people from their common goods and the city. So for us, this webinar was a way to open a month of events, actions, mobilizations that will be organized all around Europe this year against the MIPIM. We will shortly present these actions at the last part of the webinar. And we would like to invite everyone, every group, every movement to join our campaign. Just maybe now 2 words for the presentation. So the presentation of Antoine will be organized in 3 parts, and after each part we will have like 15 minutes of exchange where each of you could ask questions. You just have to raise your hand in the Zoom application. And maybe I'd just like to propose that in these 15 minutes, we limit ourselves on asking questions rather than expressing our opinions and taking positions about what has been presented. And because also this will have like the last part of conclusions and exchange and discussion at the end. So the last part, it will be exchange, conclusions, but also the perspectives of future actions and mobilizations. So I think that's all. And so I leave the floor to Antoine to start his presentation. And thank you.
Thank you, Eva and Stella, and good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you here, virtually, of course. So I'm Antoine Guironnet. I'm an urban political economist. I'm an associate researcher at Sciences Po, and I've been invited, and I want to thank the European Action Coalition for this, to give a talk about MIPIM, on which I have conducted several years of research from 2012, where I first went to MIPIM, to 2019, when I then started to write a book on the topic, which was published last year by Éditions Les Étacs, and which you have the cover right here. So you may be familiar with MIPIM, the self-proclaimed world's leading property market. And actually, you may have heard perhaps of MIPIM since the European Action Coalition launched a campaign in 2014, which targeted the event in Cannes and then the following editions of MIPIM UK in Europe. In London, sorry. So what does MIPIM stand for? In his 2014 keynote talk, Boris Johnson, who was then the mayor of London and of the Greater London Authority, and who had become a key figure over the years, tried to make some sense of it. First, Johnson joked about MIPIM, which for him meant meet me at the pool in a minute, which already gives you some sense of the boys' club ambiance on the French Riviera, which MIPIM is very famous for, and sometimes is attracting controversy in the mainstream media. Second, Johnson went on to emphasize the trickle-down logic, so making important property investment for millions of Londoners on modest incomes, according to him. So he stressed the trickle-down logic that drives many local authorities to MIPIM, where they hope to raise their profile on the real estate investment market. So I think this is interesting because it captures an important driver of MIPIM's development and history in the past decades. It also tells us something about its social logic, how MIPIM functions, especially from the viewpoint of local authorities and their elected official. But I will argue later in the talk that this operating logic is not that simple. It's not like pure trickle down, as many deals are not directly struck and negotiated at MIPIM. The story is a little bit more complex. So, leaving aside Johnson's jokes, MIPIM actually stands for the Marché International des Professionnels de l'Immobilier. It's basically a convention, or rather a marketplace, as ReadMeDem calls it and wants us to call it, created in 1990. So it's been around for 30 years now, 3 decades. It's based on what ReadMeDem was already doing in the music and film industry, and they applied the model to real estate. on the eve of one of the largest property crises ever. Basically, MIPIM is an event. It lasts 4 days in France, in Cannes, and it gathers thousands of self-claimed professionals, which are selected on the basis of their purchasing power, because there is a very high entrance fee, and their social status. And these professionals, as you can see, are involved all across the property industries, from bankers and investors to localities, including, of course, property developers, agents, planners, and journalists. The event takes place and is centered around the Palais des Festivals, where some of the participant companies rent exhibiting space, but it's also actually like much larger than the single Palais des Festivals, and it spreads throughout the city, which really lives by, and it lives on MIPIM for these 4 days. So the Palais des Festivals, as you can see from this aerial photo, is the focus of the exhibition. It's also taking place outside of the Palais. On the left, you have the big pavilions. These are the most prestigious locations, with Paris, London, Istanbul in between, and Moscow used to come, but is not coming anymore because of the war. And on the right, the area also includes the yachts. The yachts are rented by property developers and property agents, other participants, to hold cocktails and business meetings. Also, there is this whole thing about yachts because it's, of course, more exclusive, and it's supposedly also cheapest than renting a space within the Palais. So there is also this kind of concurrence of competition, between the Palais and the yacht. So provided they have paid for a pass, which is more than 1,000 euros, visitors, mostly white men in suits, can stroll through the Palais and go from one stand to another to visit architectural models. They can attend conferences, they can attend business meetings, and also they can attend more mundane events such as cocktails. As I was saying, MIPIM actually takes over the whole city of Cannes, which is like a playground for thousands of participants for these 4 days. Restaurants, bars, but also palaces, such as the Carlton here, welcome conferences, business meetings, and other like prestigious events. In the book and in my research, my main argument is that MIPIM serves as a key site to study the financialization of urban space and governance. And I understand financialization as the process of a growing integration between financial markets and the built environment. So just a few words about this definition, because I think it's important, as financialization can have very different meanings depending on who you are reading or talking with. So for me, financialization, it involves this growing integration between property markets and financial markets. It unfolds via like the more and more important role and power of finance capital and actors, finance instruments such as derivatives, funds, all this sort of stuff which enhance capital liquidity. And it also unfolds through tools and calculation devices which define value as future revenues and compare these values between different investments. So you compare the returns of property, for example, with the returns of other financial products. In the presentation, when I'll talk about investors, so these finance capital actors, I will actually mean 2 main types of investors. Institutional investors, so you have a list here, some examples. These investors, they collect and manage the money of households, states, and firms, and they allocate 5 to 10% of this money into real estate. But usually they don't invest directly in real estate. They can, but they are not expert of real estate. So they usually go through specialized real estate investors, which are on the right. For example, fund and asset managers, the most famous being Blackstone, and also real estate investment trusts, for example, such as Vonovia. So what is the role of MIPIM in this process of financialization? There are 3 main points which basically form the main arguments of my research. First, MIPIM is not like a reflection of financialization that will take place somewhere else. I think it directly and actively contributes to financialization and is thus one of the many engines of the financialization of cities. Secondly, contrary to the mainstream discourse and read-me-them discourse of a market where the supply and demand of capital meet based on a price, so the idea that MIPIM is where you make deals, where you sign deals, I argue that MIPIM functions according to accreditation, which is a concept I am using from political philosophy, and I'm not going to enter too much into this right now. And thirdly, using some case studies on French cities, I show that under specific circumstances, and I'll give some examples later in the talk, this accreditation may result in very material consequences of urban planning and politics. And it can, so because local authorities attend MIPIM, there can be strong consequences for urban space and essentially for the residents. So in other words, what happened in Cannes doesn't necessarily stay in Cannes. It can have long-lasting effects over what gets built, where, and for whom. So in the first part, I will summarize some of the main trends that have emerged over the last 30 years of MIPIM, paying attention to how the attendance of the show has evolved in terms of geography and scope. Then I will focus on the role of cities at MIPIM. And then, as Stella said, I will detail the program for the upcoming edition 2023. So going over the main past trends of MIPIM for the past 3 decades. So over the year, MIPIM has attracted a growing number of individuals and countries, which you can see over this graph. There was a big peak, of course, on the eve of the global financial crisis with more than 30,000 participants. Then it dropped to 20,000. And then there was again a steady growth thereafter, which came to be interrupted by the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course. The increase of the number and geographical scope of MIPIM can be seen through the creation of big pavilions, such as Istanbul's right here in MIPIM 2015. And this increase of the geographical scope, MIPIM being more global, if you will, is directly the result of the power of financial actors. Indeed, the content of MIPIM is adjusted to their imperative in that specific instance. ReadMeDem has adjusted the kind of countries and cities which are presented to the logic of portfolio diversification, according to which investors try to diversify the allocation of their capital by investing in different countries and in different cities in order to mitigate their risks. So over the years, ReadMeDem has adjusted the geographical scope of the show, as I was saying. For example, in 2008, it created MIPIM Horizons. So there was a specific event created for emerging countries, but bad timing because it was just during the global financial crisis. And also the representatives from emerging countries went to see ReadMeDem, the organizer of the MIPIM, and asked to be reintegrated into the main event because they wanted to benefit from the symbolic status of being in the same space and during the same event as other big markets such as Paris and London. And so that's why, for example, Istanbul was introduced in MIPIM in 2011. It was directly linked to this issue of offering a larger, more different portfolio diversification to investors at a time when Turkey was going through a building boom, which offered what was perceived as an attractive yet risky opportunity. So this reflects a strong relationship between ReadMeDem and its investors' clientele. And it reflects also the fact that ReadMeDem has this sort of dance, if you allow me the expression, with the investors, which they try at the same time to anticipate the interest of investors. And also when they see that trends are like being more and more important among the investment market, then they create space, then they create content in the program to make more room for these countries, for example, or for other topics such as housing to be integrated in the event. So investors, obviously, they enjoy in that regard a very strong position, a dominating position, mostly because they control the allocation of capital. And in the case of MIPIM, this is also reinforced by the fact that some of the top management of MIPIM was actually working in the past for these investors. They worked for example, different investment funds. So they are very familiar with this reasoning of investors. However, if we look more precisely at the number of participants, the geography of the event is way less global and way more European. So MIPIM claims that there are 100 countries that are represented at MIPIM, but a study led by Ludovic Albert and colleagues found that more than 90 of participants came from only a dozen of countries. So, of course, there are 100 countries, but the vast majority of participants are coming from a very limited numbers of countries. Secondly, among these countries, France, the UK, and Germany form the bulk of participants, sending more than 60% of participants for the most recent editions. So 6 participants out of 10 come from these 3 European and mostly Western European, actually, countries. To the point that despite the significance, for example, of the United States, when you look at investment flows, a lot of investment flows, they come from the US in the European market, but you don't see the US that much on MIPIM. And like even journalists were joking about this, saying that nobody knows in New York City what MIPIM really is. So this is not to say that there are not participants from other European countries. And I think that besides France, the UK, and Germany, many more countries which are represented across the European coalition are participating. But I think it should be kept in mind, and it should serve as an antidote against the official discourse of like this single, unified global real estate market across which capital can just like go from one place to the other, you know, like this in a second. The very same logic of portfolio diversification has also guided the inclusion of, quote, alternative asset classes over the year. So initially, MIPIM was focused on what investors are really like, most of them invest in, which are offices, so towers, big office buildings. But they have also, over the years, started to diversify and to go outside of offices and to be more and more interested into logistics, retail, hostels, and housing. And again, in order to provide investors these opportunities for diversification outside of the office market, MIPIM has enlarged the scope of MIPIM by opening new spaces in the Palais and by opening new slots in the official program to include all of these different opportunities and lately affordable housing. So initially, housing was mostly absent from MIPIM, at least for the archives I've been digging into. MIPIM mostly focused on non-residential investment initiatives by international actors such as UN Habitat, initiatives about slum clearance, emergency housing, but these were really like single isolated initiatives which seemed to be more marginal. Things started to change in the next decade, during which housing has been framed in terms of affordability, and the geographical scope shifted from the global south to the north. In 2014, Boris Johnson, who was then the mayor of London, gave a keynote speech on the topic, using MIPIM as a political platform to release an agreement which was signed by 60 developers for so-called affordable housing. And Johnson used this also to go against critiques made by grassroots networks and movements. This was followed by MIPIM's initiative to promote the topic directly in the official program. In 2016, for example, MIPIM declared that housing first was going to be the official theme of the conference. So it meant that there was a dedicated track of conferences. They also issued a white paper, which positioned housing as the next and upcoming asset class. So basically housing as a financial investment. And the report also detailed how local authorities should secure finance capital in the provision of affordable housing, such as giving construction bonuses, streamlining planning applications, and giving away free public land. This housing turn, and more particularly the emphasis of affordability, was also noticeable when you looked at some of the stands of public authorities, such as Lisbon's. So this was when I was at MIPIM 2018. Lisbon unveiled a program, for example, for the building of 7,000 affordable units on public land located in 15 different locations. And as you can see here, and as you can see, directly positioning this as investment opportunities, offering an attractive return for low risk, stable income, so regular rent and long-term investment. Also looking for investors with different, how to say, like investment size. I was very interested to note that this affordable housing turn of the MIPIM was sort of emerging parallel to the rise in contestation of the event led by the European Action Coalition. So therefore, I wondered if, or at least I thought it was tempting to understand this as an attempt to neutralize the criticism by absorbing it. However, the research was not very conclusive in this regard. It's rather that I think, from what I understand, MIPIM seems to be more preoccupied by the image of the event and the image of the real estate industry, which they have tried to improve in the mainstream media and in the real estate press by adopting a more austere communication. So, for example, no photos with champagne, getting rid of the party aspect of the event, presenting the event as a business-focused event. Also, they have been very busy at managing issues relating, for example, to the lack of women in the real estate industry or to scandals around prostitution during the event. So, in other words, MIPIM didn't seem that preoccupied by this criticism about affordable housing. Rather, it seems that the significance of housing at MIPIM is linked to the rising interest of investors for what they see as new investment opportunities, or in the words of the 2016 report, a neglected asset class with potential high added values. So as you may know, the links between housing and financial markets have shifted since the global financial crisis. Before the crisis, this link was very much centered around buying and selling mortgage-backed securities. And now this link is being reconfigured, and it's mostly about investors, so pension funds, asset management companies such as Blackstone, REITs, which are directly buying and selling portfolios of single-family rentals in the US, multifamily buildings, including senior and student housing. And this is just an example at the global scale, just for multifamily housing, that such an investment has increased from 30 billion US dollars to, before the pandemic, at least 200, more than 200 billions of US dollars. And the share of housing in the total of investments went from 60% to 25%. So a fourth of investments, of these kinds of investments, are now going into housing. Last but not least, there has been a significant change also in the profile of participants which are attending MIPIM. Formerly, the event was dedicated, as its names reflect, to real estate professionals from the private sector. So you went to MIPIM, you mostly met developers, investors, agents, bankers. There's been a huge shift during the 2000s, and now when you go to MIPIM, what is like really striking is all these local authorities which are not only attending MIPIM, but they are exhibiting their project. So they are special participants, not only visitors, but exhibitors. We've seen a clear rise in the numbers of localities participating as exhibitors. It's been documented. We've seen also a growth in the size of the delegation. So not only you have more local authorities, but you have more people representing these local authorities. These people are elected officials, civil servants, and planners, and they go here on behalf of cities, regions, and countries. And in the second part of the talk, I will detail more like who goes there, what do they do here, and what are the consequences. So that's just like a basic overview of the main trends that we've witnessed at MIPIM. So to sum up, a more diversified geographical scope, although it remains very much Western European centric. We've also seen more and more interest for housing, and we've also seen a shift from real estate to urban planning.
Okay, so thank you very much, Antoine, for your presentation, which was really, really interesting. And so, as I said at the beginning, we will have 15 minutes of questions and also let some time to Antoine to answer. And about the, I would say, expressing opinions or other exchanges, we will do it at the last part. So if you want to ask questions, you can raise your hand in Zoom or write it in the chat. Yes, so Maria Joao from Habitat.
Hey, sorry, it's Joao
Hey.
from Habitat.
Not me, you're okay.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was saying it's not me, but go on.
It is me then. Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, because you said at one point that just the US was not very present. I was just wondering if there could be any way that the US is present, but through like headquarters in Europe. For instance, AXA also exists in the US. I'm not sure if that's true for other investment funds and stuff like this, but I was just wondering.
Okay, I propose that maybe we take 3 questions or 2 questions and after you answer, or as you like, Antoine, or maybe you answer directly. Okay, is there any other question? Okay, so maybe you can go on and after people will have.
Sure. Thanks, Joao, for your question. I'm not sure I have a definitive answer. For me, it's still a puzzle, like this mismatch between the significance of the US in many respects. But if we just look at numbers of investments, I mean, they are so big. If we look at also the share of the US, for example, in the market of property management, brokerage, all these like real estate services for investors, the US is so big, but in the numbers, they don't really show in MIPIM. So how to make sense of this puzzle? Yeah, as you can say, I mean, probably they have some headquarters in Europe, and they can be, of course, represented by their fund managers or their asset managers. So perhaps they don't even need to be here, and they just, you know, wait for fund and asset managers to sort of do the job for them. And there is this sort of division of task, geographical or even between the scales, division of tasks. So that's one thing. I think also the US are, I mean, it depends also, we have to be, and I should be more precise because you can, so if we talk about the cities, there is actually like a couple of US cities in the Palais des Festivals, but I mean, it's not a lot of people. It seems that they don't really know what they are doing here. If you compare to other like big stands, they seem to be sort of small players. If you look at investors, then some of the biggest are here. I remember going into the hotel and seeing that a kakemono with the Blackstone logo. So obviously, I mean, Blackstone is going there, and I mean, we should not only focus on Blackstone, but that's, I guess, the most like famous example. So I'm oftentimes using it. But so the US, they may not be large in terms of the numbers of participants, but if you attract big investors, then they are large in the size of capital that is present at MIPIM.
Okay, thank you, Antoine. There are a lot of people reacting and asking questions. So Eva, after Jan, and after we have like 3 questions in the chat, and I hope we'll have enough time to answer to every question. So Eva.
Yes, I don't know if it's a question for now or for later. You will judge, Antoine, if you want to answer it now or keep it. Just what makes me really curious is how we have the subprime crisis in 2007, and then in 2008 we have so much participation to the MIPIM. And I want to know how you see the relation between a crisis that comes from a sort of financialization of housing, and on the other side, an event that provokes and encourages financialization of housing, which is not affected at all, and on the contrary, has more participants. So, yeah, I just wanted to have your I don't understand this contradiction.
So it's technical, I will say. The explanation is, if I may, simple. It's because of the business of read them. The contracts are signed 1 year in advance. So when the crisis hit, all the contracts were already paid for. Everything was paid for. Everything was arranged. So I mean, I guess people went because it was already paid for. I mean, I was not there personally. I was not even like researching this at the time, but this is why I understand how the business model works. This also explains, for example, why we've seen some Green Party mayors in France, for example, not to name them, Lyon, going last year. They had, because we could have expected, one could have expected that they would not go. And because it was the first year they were in power, and the ticket was already booked by the previous majority, so they say, okay, it's already paid for, so we should go. Or why we shouldn't go, but that's basically this.
Okay, so next question is Jan, and he wrote in the chat, can you explain a bit the structure of READ MIPIM? They seem to have a department for political strategy. What else are they doing?
Okay. I'm just finishing. Yeah. So ReadMeDem is the subsidiary of a big multinational. The RNX, I guess, or RLX. I don't remember, but you can find this online. Which are doing like lots of different stuff. For example, they own the Elsevier, the scientific publisher. They have an analytics business. They have 4 main business, and one of them is organizing events. And they are organizing like perhaps 300 events each year. But MIPIM Cannes is the biggest, the most prestigious, and from what I understand, the most lucrative one. And it's actually, so ReadMeDem, the team which manages the MIPIM show is actually located in France. And it's not a lot of people. Some of them, as I was saying, have worked in the past for real estate investment funds. And I'm not aware that they have like a political team. They have sort of most of the resources, they go into like having this relationship with their customers, and then they have different customers, for example, investors, and then they sort of organize according to the type of customers or to the country. And then they just like try to have regular customers, and then when they have space left, they also try to attract new people. But I'm not aware that, perhaps they do, but I'm not aware of any political like team or something.
Okay, so we have 2 last questions in the chat, and I think we have to go a little bit faster because it's already time to start the second part. So is there any attention? I will read both of them, so maybe you can answer for both of them. Is there any attention for soil preservation? As I hear, they talk about building affordable housing on sites belonging to the city, for example, in Lisbon. And also, what did the MIPIM recently do regarding digitalization and energetic renovation this year?
Yeah, the last one, I guess, this couple one from Knut, I will talk in the last part. And I'm not aware of any like soil preservation at MIPIM. But I mean, it's such a huge event perhaps they have some talk about this. Perhaps there is one conference in the official program. I mean, it's really large, and so but in the focus I have used, I haven't been aware of these topics.
Okay, thank you. So let's go on for the second part.
Yeah, sure. Let me. Okay, can you see the screen now? Is it good for you? Sorry, I missed that. Okay, nice. So in the second part, I'm going to focus on the attendance of localities, which are often represented by public authorities. So initially, as I was saying, MIPIM was mostly dedicated to the private sector. Public authorities were not very important participants, even less as exhibitors leasing space for a stand. The exception in that regard was London. London has been a key participant since the beginning. It's been a pioneer in many respects, including in the way localities approach the event. So in 1992, so just 2 years after the creation of MIPIM, London had an approach which combined the presentation of a big architectural model, and which is attracting like a lot of attention, and which has been copied since then. So the London formula, if you will, was a big architectural model of the city of London. And at the time, they wanted to sell the city of London against Canary Wharf, which was like the emerging business location east of the city, and also to compete against Frankfurt. And the second part of the London formula was what is known today as a one-stop shop stand. So it basically means you have a partnership between local public authorities and property developers. And so London as a locality, and you have the same model elsewhere in some cities, is represented by a mix of public-private actors. And this mode of participation is promoted by MIPIM. They argue that first it helped public authorities to cover for the cost, which apparently they increase each year. And also they said that it's good to attract investors, because investors, they have this one-stop shop. They only have to go to one place and they can speak to all the different local, public and private actors in a single place. So they can sort of have the discourse from the mayor and then balance this with the property agents, because, you know, sometimes mayors tend to like perhaps oversell their cities, or like have this really like big promotional discourse that they want to balance with sort of other sources of expertise. Besides this particular case, the London case, you have a whole range of public authorities which are attending MIPIM, where they exhibit projects which offer real estate opportunities for investors. Over the years, they have become like a very strong component of the event. And they are generally represented by two types of actors. So obviously elected officials, such as mayors, from various political stripes, from the left to the right, including Green parties, even communists. It's quite impressive to see that you have this whole political spectrum that attends MIPIM. And it's such like, it has become a political norm, so to an extent that the ones who are not here are immediately remarked and are attracting local controversy, such as London's Mayor Sadiq Khan. So this is an article which was published in the Estate Gazette, which is like an important real estate news outlet in the UK, and which like debated over 2 pages whether the absence of Sadiq Khan, which was likely tied to the contestation of the event in London, is something good or bad for the city. So the presence of mayors is thought to be key because they can provide political leadership by setting priorities over the long term, and they can make sure that the different political resources and including like very material ones, such as public investment, are being put together into one direction, for example, supporting a major large-scale regeneration project. But they can, when they are at MIPIM, also take short-term decisions to unlock tricky situations. So you often hear these stories about these very important business meetings where the mayor was here and there were like some issues, and it he or she took, but mostly he, took a decision to unlock a tricky situation, for example, about competition between two different projects, or perhaps even contestations. I don't have a specific example about contestation, but I think this is sort of the arguments that at least README is like using to convince mayors to, I mean, they're not saying this specific example, but you see the thing. You also have a lot of technical staffers. I mean, of course, we think and we see the mayors, but most of the people representing local authorities are not mayors. They are technical staffers. They can be civil servants. They can be people from development corporations, so what we call aménageurs in France. And their presence is also important because they know the technical details. They know the nitty-gritty stuff. And they can offer some guarantee that the mayor's speech will be turned into acts. So they can make sure that speeches are not like just speeches one day at MIPIM, but that they are translating into hard decisions, so to speak. So now if we turn to why do public authorities attend at MIPIM? So I've been doing lots of on-site interviews. I've also interviewed many people, so mostly people from French cities, public authorities who attend MIPIM. And every time, the first and foremost reason is this paradox that you have to be at MIPIM because you cannot not be here. So it will be impossible not to come at MIPIM because it will send a bad signal to the market. And things are even worse if you've come 1 year and you are not here the year after, because people are going to talk about like imagining things and like are going to doubt about if you are really a thriving territory with lots of activity going on. So if you don't come, you send a bad signal to the market. Which market? Well, it's clear that it's mostly the property market, but more precisely the investment market. For public authorities, the aim is to maintain their rank on the investment map. So not because they will strike deals with investors during the event, because spoiler, they don't, but they believe that being here can help them to improve their position in the eyes of investors, not only in terms of like generating revenues, but also in terms of providing the different conditions to de-risk the investors. And I will explain more in a minute. There are other less important motives, such as, for example, job networking, especially given that we're seeing more and more professionals from the public sector going to work in the private sector. And there are also people doing like benchmarking, so visiting other stands, seeing other projects, attending conferences to sort of cherry pick what they think are the best practices, including in terms of attracting investors, and to bring them home and to try to implement this in their own cities. So what are the consequences of the public authorities' attendance? First, I think that on a very general level, MIPIM functions as this extreme experience of the competition between localities for supposedly hypermobile capital. So if you remember all this like idea and discourse about like this global capital being able to like go from one city to the other as easy as it is to go from one stand to the other. So the event sort of enacts the very idea that localities are fixed places that wait for a mobile capital they need to attract. And they need to attract, and this capital is like quite mobile, both in actual terms, like because you see people from going from one stand to the other, and actually many of these people are not investors, but you never know because they may be an investor. And it's also fictional. It's this idea of a global liquid real estate market. And as a result, I would argue that MIPIM served as this yearly repeated disciplining experience that they go through, and they are here, that see all like these people, they see that there is these other major European cities that they have to compete against. And I think this, I mean, it's very palpable when you talk about public authorities, representatives about their experience at MIPIM. Secondly, I would argue that MIPIM has consequences, again, not because these people strike deals with investors during the show, but rather because they learn what the rules of the game are, which they can then try to implement within their planning policies, within their regeneration projects. So in other words, MIPIM serves as a place where localities learn how to think like an investor. And there are different ways they can learn about it. One is that they get advice, informal advices from ReadMeDem on various topics. For example, including the type of projects which are attractive, the type of people who should come to represent the city. And so not only mayors, but also these technical staffers, the type of stand they could, like the organization of the stand with this idea of having a showing a strong public-private local partnership. The second way these localities learn how to think like an investor is the partnership with local property consultants and developers, which they use sometimes to prepare for the show. So in fact, this learning of the rules does not only happen during the event, which the event is quite short, actually, these 4 days go just like this, but it happens through over a longer period after several years of attending or having like this feedback from the property developers. Some of the localities realize what investors are expecting. And this can have very major and long-lasting consequences, as I will exemplify. So to expand on this topic, I would like to give an example of the consequences of attending MIPIM based on a detailed case study, which is the city of Lyon, which is the first major region in France. And let me underline the fact that this story is not about housing, but is about offices, the production of offices, given that this is the market that most investors used to focus on and are still actually focusing on, even if they diversify and are more and more interested by housing, offices remain like the most important market for them. However, I want to stress that it's not because they are not investing a lot into housing that it's not important when defending the right to the city, because this still has an impact over the life of the people, both in terms of job distribution, for example, the type of jobs which are available near the place where you live. It also has strong consequences over the urban form in general. In the case of the Lyon City region, participation had outcomes that were far beyond the walls of MIPIM, because the expectations of investors were directly integrated into the urban planning strategies and the guidelines of single large-scale regeneration projects. So in other words, in that case, MIPIM served as a laboratory to design a policy which aimed at making sure that the motto of Lyon, premium value, became real. So the whole story about Lyon is, how do you make like something which is more of a marketing, of a slogan? How do you turn this into a public policy? And the idea was to, the aim of this policy was to guarantee a low risk return. And in that order, the planning policy was designed to regulate the supply of office in space and time by sticking to three main guiding principles. So the idea was like to concentrate development into these four red hotspots. So making sure that you have what investors call a critical mass in these hotspots, because it is thought by investors to offer buildings which are more liquid, and I can expand more on this in the Q&A. And this has consequences over the urban form, because it means that these territories benefit from offices, but the others don't, not at least brand new offices. And it also means that in order to reach this critical mass, you don't mix housing, offices, retail, but you concentrate offices around transportation hubs. There were other guiding principles, one being hierarchization, the other being planning across time. So making sure that you regulate property development across time. So you make sure that you provide a steady income to investor, and that the value of their investment is increasing, not a lot, but surely, but slowly. And this expertise was not only used to guide planning at the metropolitan scale, as we can see here, but it was also used to adjust the content of some of the largest scale regeneration projects, such as the Carré de Soie, for example, which I studied. For example, by making sure that the characteristics of buildings and location match what the investors are expecting. So in terms of offices, for example, this means that these has to be large buildings which are concentrated in space, which are not mixed with housing, the way we can see in mixed-use projects, and which are leased to big enterprises. Big tenants who are able to sign a lease for many years. And so what this tells us is that it doesn't welcome small businesses, for example. Small businesses are not welcome in this type of investments. So they have to go to look for, if they want new buildings, they have to go to another project, or they have to rent something which is not brand new, or which is at least financed by another means. And yeah, I guess that's it for the local authorities.
Okay, thank you very much, Antoine, for your presentation. It's really interesting. Also because it talks about, as Jan stressed it in the chat, about the public actors that are attending to this meeting, and that we are planning also to interpel, like to ask them what they are doing there, is also the name of the webinar of tonight. Anyway, I let the comments for the last part, and let's go on with the questions. Okay, I have a question. In the first part, you stressed how the geographic, like where the participants are coming from, And you said that even though the organizers of the MIPIM say that there are like 100 countries participating, finally there are like some more Western European countries that they are participating. And I understood that it's in terms of investors, like in the actors of the private sector of the market. So what about the public actors? Because in my opinion, like the public actors represent the new potential cities where the investment will go and the capital will go. So is there any renewal in the public actors and in the cities that participate? For example, is there more Eastern European countries that participate in the meeting? Like, what are the tendencies about the,
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'm worried I don't have the answer because I haven't been able to mix these two criteria. So whether you are a public actor and where you come from. So it's hard to, because you were right. I mean, when I was speaking about the importance, the relevance of the US, the UK, France, and Germany, so mostly, I mean, a part of Western Europe, I meant across all participants. So the figures I'm giving is for all participants, so public and private. But indeed, the geographic scope of public actors may be more diverse. And again, I mean, even private sector, I mean, even though it's 60%, it's still 40% of people coming from someplace else, from, I mean, of these other countries. I remember that Poland, I think, is a big is a big participant. I should look. Do I have the graph here? You can try to have a look, but yeah. I mean, I'm not able at that point to really know, I mean, to answer the questions and to really like identify if there is a shift right now towards Eastern Europe. I think I can sense that this shift was already operating a couple of years ago. I mean, I don't think it, should we see these countries or cities? I wouldn't say it's something very new, but that's more a gut feeling. That's something like which I can see in statistics.
Thank you. So Peter from Berlin.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really interesting. I have one question is related to the other one. Do you think that it can, the fact that there's not so many Eastern European municipalities participating, is that there is less public ownership in Eastern Europe, or less available land and other assets that are still to be privatized as they're already privatized mostly? And the second question I would like to ask is, as I understand, there's very public participation is also not so strong from outside Europe. And what do you think, like globally? Because for example, there's very few African countries present. Why do you think that is so? There is a lot of growing markets in Asia and Africa, and they're sort of connected to European industries or interest. Why this is so? What do you think?
Thank you, Peter. So yeah, the first one, it's again a tricky one, because I'm not sure this is strictly related to the supply of public land, because I'm not sure that all the projects we see on MIPIM are always based on public land. I mean, some of them, they can be just regeneration of industrial land, and the public is just assuming like the investments or the regulation, but is not buying itself the land. And I will argue that given the austerity, the rise of austerity local austerity we've been seeing in the past years across many European countries, this is less and less the case, that the public is buying the land and because they don't have anymore the budgetary capacity to do so. So that's I mean, still a question mark, this thing about Eastern European countries. I think it may also be because there is, so MIPIM is of course perhaps the most well-known event. You also have Expo Real, which is taking place in Munich each October. And I know that this is, at least in the official discourse, very more centered around Europe, and especially Central and Eastern Europe, and markets like malls and logistics. So it may also be the case that there is this sort of typologic division of market between RIDMIDEM and Expo Real. So that's one thing. So public participation outside Europe. Yeah, so besides so you have the US pavilion, which I talked about, which is not that. You also have, I can remember, for example, Japan is coming. So you have Qatar, Egypt, so things like this. So you find exceptions, but I am having a hard time, like, again, seeing this in the statistics. As for Asia, I think there are, so besides the case, for example, of Japan, I think it's because MIPIM has also created a local version called MIPIM Asia. It takes place in Hong Kong, usually. So it's sort of like MIPIM UK, which takes place in London. But you don't have like the exhibiting part. It's just conferences and networking. But I think that most of the Asian players are meeting there with some of the big investors, perhaps from Europe or the US, because you have this strong connection across the Asia-Pacific region. So again, we're seeing this geographical division, which is in that case like directly orchestrated between by RIDMIDEM itself.
So other questions in the chat. There is a question in French from Dal. So I will translate it.
I will talk about it. Yeah, I will talk about it in a moment.
Okay, it's about if you have more information about the public actors that participate this year, and also a comment about what you are saying from Veronica. So about the geographic scope of MIPIM, I have the impression that, Antoine, feel free to correct, that medium-sized cities are increasingly participating at MIPIM. For instance, Bologna participated last year. It seems that they want to attract investors interested in financing and building student housing. Very interesting.
Yeah, so I haven't worked like the statistics again precisely, but as for like the French case, which I'm more familiar with, I will say that I don't see this evolution, or at least it's not recent. I mean, some of these, for example, Lyon, they've been going like since 20 years, I guess. And all the other like medium-sized cities, they've been going for some time now. So perhaps there are differences like between countries. It's possible. But again, I mean, it remains to be like seen if this is really the case. So yeah, the banking sector. So the banking sector, you have, so bankers are here. Then you have to, I would make the difference between traditional bankers, which I have no idea about. I mean, probably they come, so bankers which will finance property developer, for example, and the subsidiaries of the big banks which are involved into fund and asset management. Yes, we see them, they are here. So they are present.
Okay, I suggest that we go on with the third part, and after we have some time for discussion.
Yes. Okay, so in the remainder of the talk, I'm going to wait. I'm going to put this here on the other screen. So yeah, I'm going to detail what this upcoming edition of MIPIM will consist of, based on public information that was released on their website and in the press. So what is not so new? So because most of this stuff actually is not that new, but it's perhaps taking some further significance. So first, there will be apparently what they call a road to zero area. So a dedicated area and conference track on net zero, which is the latest iteration of a rising attention to climate and sustainability topics, which actually have been discussed at MIPIM since a decade, but are gaining more and more traction given the development of so-called ESG investing, so investment that are supposed to factor in environmental, social, and governance criteria, what we used to know as social responsibility. And indeed, institutional and real estate investors have started to pay attention to the issue with a strong focus on energy consumption at the level of the building most of the time, because of regulatory evolutions, for example, at the European Union level or at the national level, which for some of them, they anticipate to be a direct threat to the value of their portfolio. So therefore, there has been much talk and for some much efforts to identify a green value, which would be an increase of value of their property assets, which are have a green certification. But in practice, this green value remains very, very hard to find. And actually, it's likely to be just a protection against what we call a brown discounting. So it's not going to be an absolute increase in value, but they think that because assets which are not green are going to decrease in value, that being green will help you just to keep the value. And again, it's mostly because the laws have been evolving. So it's mostly under the constraint that investors are paying attention to this. There will be also a Forum des élus, which is actually a closed-door event for French elected officials and private executives to meet around, quote, the city of the future, unquote, FEM, so la ville du futur. This echoes what already existed again, because since 2009, mayors can attend a mayor's think tank where they can debate a wide range of topics such as infrastructure, housing, and digital innovation, which are larger than financial issues. So they discuss very different topics, but during which financial issues are still considered. The difference with this new event is that it seems to be focused on one country only and include private decision makers. So it's not anymore about a mayor's think tank with just mayors. It's not what existed for the Paris Pavilion because in the Paris Pavilion, they already had these networking events, but it's something on a bigger scale. And I think it echoes Reed Midham's effort to position the event from a focus on real estate to a more general perspective centered around city making and public-private partnership. So this is one of the things, if you look at the interviews they've been giving in the past years, they want to give this more general direction to the show, probably also because they want to attract public authorities, and but I would argue that they are trying to do this, but actually the way people think still remains like a property viewpoint and a financialized property approach to city making and more generally urban space and governance. Last but not least, there will be special events which are dedicated to specific topics on Monday, which is the day before the official opening. So these two events are going to focus on what investors consider to be specific asset classes, which can, again, if you remember the first part, help them diversify out of their traditional investment opportunities like offices or malls. As you can see, one of them is dedicated to co-living, which I think signal that the housing question is still on the agenda for this 2023 edition. And indeed, there seems to be an amplification of the interest for housing, which we have witnessed for the past years. I think this is clearly seen in the official program, which is available online. So first of all, there will be conferences on various topics relating to housing at different scales, including on some city stands such as London. So this is just a couple of these conferences, but you have actually more. And as you can see, there is still the focus on affordable housing, sustainable housing, and of course on what they now call living investments. So also from housing to living, this is part of the general discourse that we are seeing in the property industry, which emphasize that the landlords, so the investors, should take into account the end users' needs and so on and so forth. So also, like, the titles of the presentations like really echo some of the larger transformation we're seeing in housing. And so a new feature is the organization of the MIPIM Co-Live Summit. So it takes its name from its sponsor, Co-Live, which presents itself as a, quote, global association of co-living professionals, unquote. And the summit is announced as, so I'm reading for the official program, a yearly event to bring together the sector's leading players that educate through sharing best practices and conference sessions on key trends, connect through networking events, and ultimately empower the sector to deliver great places. It's going to be available through the purchase of a separate 300 euros ticket. So you can access this event without going to the rest of the event. As you may know, co-living is a specific housing product. It's a commodity that has attracted rising interest from investors. It is a new product that combines a flexible short-term leasing tenure, the sharing of amenities, high-end services, and the idea of community is emphasized. And these generally come at a high cost. And generally, they are targeting young, mobile, basically young yuppies, which are mobile and are looking for like high-end, flexible, and a sense of what they see to be a sense of community. So co-living is currently pushed as an investment opportunity for investors. As you can see, for example, this is just a research report I've found on Google, which was released on the UK Property Agent Savills 2 years ago. And as you can see, they really tried to position it as a huge opportunity for investors with a strong demand, a growing pipelines. So more and more building opportunities and increasing investments for other investors. So they are trying to kickstart this market. And I guess that this was what the summit will be about. Additionally, there will be a workshop dedicated to housing. So the workshop is sponsored by Blueground, which is apparently a Greek company offering flexible residencies to high-end tenants looking for mobility. So it seems to, I mean, I don't think they're using the co-living concept, but it seems to be very similar. And it's also sponsored by Chanels, which I wasn't aware of, but which seems to be a property technology company using a digital solution. So basically an application for landlords, so building owners, to manage their relationship with tenants. And according to the official program, this workshop is, I'm quoting from the program, designed for investors, developers, and political leaders. And it will enable participants to debate how to better boost housing opportunities, new living concepts, and the future of residential design. In particular, it will comment on how buildings need to be perceived as more than just assets, but as products tailored to customers. And so that speaks and echoes what I was saying about the shift from housing to living. So this emphasis on end users and the building being more than just assets, which, I mean, we can approach with a critical mindset. And I would say that it's true that they may want to pay better attention to the end users, but these are specific end users which will fit what an asset is. So it's not being more than just an asset, but it's the relationship between the two that one should question, I think. And I guess this reflects the more general emphasis put on end users. Probably also that we are seeing a lot of this talk about end users, and you can see it also in the offices, in the office market. Probably it's linked to the macroeconomic turbulences that that many economies are experiencing. So usually when you are an investor and you are a landlord, when your tenants have trouble to pay, then you start to pay more attention. And it's different when the investment market is booming, and then because you have perhaps less attention to pay to this. But that's just an hypothesis. So in addition to the keynote address, the panel discussion, you can see that there will be 10 roundtables, and these roundtables are split between different tenures. So as you can see, they represent different niche market for investors, which are really so it's not even housing anymore, but it's these different sub-market within housing, which are regulated differently across the different tenures, and I guess also across different spaces. And yeah, I guess that's most of what I wanted to say about the upcoming edition.
Thank you again, Antoine. This last part was also really, really interesting. And also it permits to see how, as you said, the shift for the interest for housing, and also for this kind of new contracts that we see they're going on also in France, and that kind of also attack the tenants' rights in the housing, like contracts they have now. Anyway, maybe yeah, we will go on with the questions. So feel free to. Okay, so there is already a question. Is there any representation of public social housing at the MIPIM? Donc in French, les bailleurs sociaux.
Yeah, it's hard to know. I will say that they don't exhibit here. They definitely don't exhibit here. So I'm not aware that they come as exhibitors, but some of them may come as participants. But I mean, it's not really a place for them, because I mean, it depends, of course, about which country we're considering. But as for France, since social housing is not yet still not open for finance capital, perhaps they don't have a direct interest in coming here. But we've seen we've seen some examples of I've seen some example of one social housing provider, which is a subsidiary of CDC Habitat, which has basically created investment funds, not for social housing, but for affordable housing. And I think they attended MIPIM sometimes, because I remember that they went on to do like a press release about how they raised capital for the Hemisphere Fund, which is a fund for emergency housing. So there may be exceptions to the rule, and some of them may attend as participants, but it's hard to know because it's you don't have access to the list of participants. I mean, it's not public.
Okay, another question. Did you meet leftist press in the MIPIM? And did you have some interview with them in other situations?
So I'm not sure what kind of leftist press you have in mind. I'm not aware of like leftist press reporting about MIPIM. I mean, yeah, no, I'm not sure. I mean, some mainstream media do report about MIPIM. Some of them are a bit critical, but they mostly focus on like the champagne and like all the extravaganza that goes around MIPIM, which I guess, yes, is part of the show, but is like the critique shouldn't only be about that. But no, I'm not aware, and I haven't met with leftist press.
Okay, there is a discussion going on about the housing companies from Germany. So Peter says that there are few public housing companies from Germany that participate, and CNAT is
it's not really public, but it's the same thing with the CDC Habitat. I mean, it's a social housing company, but it's a private one, but it's owned by this public bank, CDC.
Question, how is affordable housing defined here? For instance, when they refer to London's affordable housing market, how is that defined? Apologies, yeah. This was already answered.
Yeah, Anna, sorry, I mean, they generally mean it in a very general sense, I guess. Then I'm assuming when the conference is on the London stand, they have perhaps like a more specific definition. But when you look at the program, it doesn't say like affordable. I think they just use this notion, which is, if I remember well, vaguely defined in terms of like, in terms of, well, I don't even remember, like, but So which tells already us something, but so I wouldn't know how it is defined.
Okay, another question. If you consider affordable housing, social housing, you showed at the beginning this image from Lisbon, various spots. The mayor was trying to find private investors to public-private partnerships to build social housing. I think it was a comment. Yeah, it's going. In your presentation, you spoke about affordable housing and a term which is, it goes too fast, which is now used by politics. Do you study housing price, contracted or presented in project from MIPIM? Oh yeah, okay.
No,
Sorry,
I
Max.
didn't. I did not really, because also you don't see a lot of this project. I mean, the Lisbon one was more like an exception to the rule, perhaps. And also because, as I said, I mean, in order to make this research operational, I had to focus on some cases. So mostly Lyon and Paris. And so in these cities, you don't see yet affordable housing projects presented. So I wasn't able to track like how this single specific project located and presented or contracted at MIPIM, which I don't think it was, but perhaps there are some contracts signed there anyway, what their prices are. But I mean, perhaps one can do one can do it if we using, like, for example, the map of the Lisbon land locations.
Last question. You spoke about co-living and micro-living. I was wondering, what about digital nomads? Do short-term rental market come to MIPIM?
So Eva, you mean Airbnb, for example, or things like this, or?
So yeah, yes, I mean Airbnb, but also because we see this kind of community living that is developed in a more enterprise way, capitalistic way, and also you spoke about the different users, like the different relations between the landlords and the renters. And the fact that there is this application where they can manage their relations. So all this made me think of course, Airbnb, but also of all these people who, because of the coronavirus crisis, came to southern regions of Europe where there is more sun and the cost of living is lower. And they work remotely, so this also changes a lot the architecture of who is renting what and for what purpose. So yeah, I was wondering if this appears also in the MIPIM this year, if you know anything about it.
I mean, perhaps it will be discussed, but I don't know. It's hard to tell at this point what will be discussed, or because I mean, I don't have access more than the official program. So, but I guess, I mean, perhaps this will be part, yeah, of the narrative the investment industry is and the property agents are building around these niche markets.
Okay, so we have just 15 minutes left. So I suggest that maybe we open the discussion. As I said at the beginning, the webinar we thought of this webinar as a way to open a month of mobilization and different actions against the MIPIM that will happen in different cities of Europe. So maybe we can also try to discuss about what kind of actions and what perspectives of mobilization we can organize together, or different like reactions and comments about the presentation. And thank you very much, Antoine. Or, okay, there are still questions going on in the chat. I just saw it. So maybe we can take like really like two last questions. Okay, there is a question. Could cities possibly make positive use of this? Could there be a mediating role between small groups of inhabitants and investors in the form of coups, for instance? And okay, I will read the two questions. What are the probabilities of the housing bubble bursting, as we have seen with the subprime crisis?
Yeah, it's hard to tell for this. It's hard to provide an answer for this two questions. I was starting to reply to Paul, so perhaps if you want to like discuss the action, and I can just reply by writing.
Okay. So if you don't have other reactions about the presentation, maybe we can start to present briefly what the coalition have decided to do this year against the MIPIM. So maybe Eva wants to do it for the coalition, or as you prefer.
Yes, or Jan, if you want, you can also say about it. So, okay, this year, I will start. The coalition has written a small call to action, actually, and we propose mainly three things. First of all, we propose that no, before I say the three things, I want to say that we have published the list of the 2023 edition of the MIPIM, of the participants of this edition on our website today, so you can find it. And the reason we did that is because we would like each of you and each of the groups that are members of the coalition and more to use this list and to write a letter to your local authorities asking them why they are going to the MIPIM. We have also on our website, in the links I put on the chat, the models of letters you can use, you can change, you can adapt as you want, and you can write a letter to the local authorities of your cities, towns, villages, anything, and also send them back to us so we can make them more appear more. Then the second thing that we invite you to do is take action in front of the local, the municipalities who are going to come to the MIPIM and also tell us about it. And finally, the third thing is that some members of the coalition will go to Cannes this year to make a press conference and denounce what is happening in the MIPIM, because of course it affects all of our actions and our work. So we need to go there and say that we are not in favor of this, and we are against actually what is happening in the MIPIM and the financialization of housing and of spaces in general. So this is very, very broad description I've made, and you will find all the details in the links I've sent. I don't know if Jan, you want to add something on it?
Okay, maybe
also,
I
just want to say that DAL is actually the initiative of this So we also want to thank them particularly for helping us doing these actions.
Thank you. Anyway, like the coalition is in the initiative, but because we are in France, we are trying to organize like kind of some stuff. And also about the action we are going to do in Cannes. Yeah, for sure, there will be this press conference and we are going to, in the next days, we are going to decide of one or different topics that will be discussed. And also there will be, we are trying to have, like we will do everything to do a demonstration there with the also local activists and people coming from Europe. And also it will be, we'll stay for 2 days. So the first day it will be the press conference and a demonstration or a gathering. And the next day it will be something like an action in support, in solidarity with local mobilization in Cannes and in Nice. So for more details, you can follow the information that the coalition will publish in the next days. And maybe, I don't know if we have other ideas or other comments about the mobilizations and actions, or about what we discussed tonight.
Notamment l'aéroport.
Okay, so there is a comrade Annie from DAL who is precising that the local mobilization, okay, I didn't want it to go into details, but why not? So one of the local mobilization going on in Nice is against the extension of the airport of Nice. And it's really important because like, for sure, as we saw, it's related also to what is happening and being decided in the MIPIM in terms of urbanization, urban development, transport, and also touristification and gentrification, because Nice is like one of the cities that is suffering from that. Yes, and maybe one other action in solidarity with local mobilization will be in a social housing neighborhood in Nice. So we had this idea that, okay, we are going there to denounce what is happening in the MIPIM, but what we really want to do is to speak to people who live in social neighborhoods and to try to like share with them and maybe mobilize with them, and yeah. So if there's no other intervention, maybe we can close this webinar here. And I'd like to thank again very much Antoine for his presentation.
Wait.
Yeah. Okay.
I think Jan wants to speak, and Maria Joao also.
Oh, sorry, I didn't so. Go on.
Go on, Maria Joao.
Well, just we have this, thank you all. We have this list of participants for this year, but I also heard that maybe we could get the list of participants for the 2 previous years, because for this year, I can see that from Portugal is mostly from Porto that local authorities are going to MIPIM. But maybe if we want in Lisbon to write to our mayor or so, it would help if we get this other 3 years list, just remembering that. So.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's over. I'm over. Thank you.
Yes, I think we will publish more list of participants if we find more, and it's really important because it's not only the participants that come this year. I wanted to thank Antoine because personally I have a way more clear picture now how we can target. Do you hear me? Okay, how we can target the public authorities, and it's so much information that I think I have to watch the whole webinar again. It's really a pity that your study is not available in English, but maybe we managed to create this public attention that some publishing house will be interested after this year's MIPIM. Yes, I think for me it's really an interesting point that what you said, that the mayors or the representatives of the municipalities put our city in competition on the market, and I think it's a really strong point for us to try to tell that our neighborhoods are not in competition. And yes, I feel also like with this year's program, we can find more connections to, for example, the climate justice movement. And there is a lot of information, and thank you for all this, Antoine.
Anna.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, with respect to what Maria-Jean said, that yeah, the previous lists are definitely very helpful, but there are a lot of news about Lisbon participating this year. I'm not sure why they're not yet on the list, but there are a lot of news and with a lot of details, including where their stand will be and things like this. So we can use that if somehow they don't appear in the list.
Okay, just to say that Antoine just sent an article in English, I suppose, yeah? So maybe you can, before we close the meeting, maybe you can download it, and Eva wants to say something.
Yeah, sorry, because I feel the time passes, so I just want to share this information with you. There was a group of comrades from Geneva, Switzerland, who occupied the building 1 week ago, and they were evicted quite immediately. The building was owned by a landlord who has other 10 of these buildings, who is known as a very as a landlord that rents in very bad conditions his properties. I don't know how to say that in English properly, but anyway, you understand what I mean. This building was emptied 2 years ago, and the occupation meant to show the structural crisis of access to housing in Geneva. So they were evicted. They are doing a demonstration on Friday, in 2 days, this Friday at 6:30 Place. Okay, I've sent the link here on the chat because I didn't write it well and I cannot read myself. But anyway, they are doing a demonstration in Geneva for the right to housing to all. And I took the opportunity of this conference because this online discussion we had to show our support to this occupation and to these people who were evicted, and to those who struggle around Europe for the access to housing, to adequate housing to all. So if you are up to showing your solidarity, your group there, I can share more information with you. You can write to the coalition, and I will send it. Thank you for letting me saying that. I think it's important to be in solidarity, as all the MIPIM guys, those who go to MIPIM, they have all the means and all the money to meet. We do it online, and we do it with the means we have. And I thought it was a good moment to share this with you.
Thank you, Eva. And yeah, I also agree that it was really important to share it. Okay, at the end, I want to thank very much the communication team of the coalition who organized the whole technical part, and I think it was not so easy. And thank everybody that participated, and we will keep in touch and see you soon. Bye.